reader work a little, which makes your reader work a little harder, make it easy. And all of these things come down to that basic concept. You want to make it audience friendly. And so don't make your reader go through unnecessary mental gymnastics by phrasing something as a negative. Another principle of concision is avoid throat clearing. And what expressions such as "it is important to note that" or "the facts show that" are called throat clearing phrases because they add little or no substance to the sentence. So if you are going to say "it is important to note that," do you really need to say that? It's more effective to just state what you were going to say is important. Just state it. So avoid those extra phrases. So this comes down to, again, that idea of concision and saying what you need to say in as few words possible. Now, those are the basic concepts. We've covered the basic, we've covered your initial considerations. We covered the basic concepts. We've covered the strategies, which are the strategies to achieve that reader-friendly writing, are the 4 C's. Now let's look into some practical tips and how we apply those in the real world. So tip number 1, I've spoken about this already: eliminate unnecessary words. I would like you to eliminate "it is," "there is," and "there are" from your writing. I'm telling you, I have eliminated it from my writing, and it makes my writing more concise and clear. Here's an example. "It is expensive to upgrade computer systems." That is a grammatically correct sentence. Nobody would say you wrote a grammatically incorrect sentence. It's just that it's wordy. It's unnecessarily wordy. Instead, you can say concisely, "Upgrading computer systems is expensive." So that's something I'm going to ask you to keep in the back of your mind in your writing. Just eliminate "it is," "there is," "there are," because that is wordy. And phrases, shorten phrases when you can. For example, "in order to." I know this is another phrase that I've eliminated intentionally from my writing. Here's a sentence: "We designed the study in order to investigate different methods." That is a grammatically correct sentence, but it is wordy. We can say it more concisely as follows: "We designed the study to investigate different methods." You don't really say, you need to say "in order to." So I've made it a practice in my writing to eliminate "in order." Instead of saying "in order to," I simply say "to," and it makes our writing that much more concise and clear. So that's an easy tip. Eliminate those unnecessary words. "It is," "there is," "there are." You don't need to say that. Another way to make your writing more effective is to use bullets and vertical lists effectively. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you imagine, if you look at imagine you're reading a paper on your computer, and all it is maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs. That computer screen, you see a whole lot of words, and you see the screen, but it's hard to digest. It is easier for your reader, and we do want to make this reader friendly. If we can use bullets and lists effectively, that'll make that paragraph into chunks that are more easily digestible by your reader. So use bullets or numbered lists if in appropriate circumstances. And by the way, what is the difference between bullets and numbered lists? Well, if all of your items are equally important, you can use bullets. Use numbered lists when your items are organized in some kind of priority or chronological order. And you may have heard someone say before, keep your bullets parallel. Well, and what does that mean? Well, that means keep your listed and bulleted items consistent in form and specificity. And here's an example. Use bullets and vertical lists effectively. Here's an example which is wrong. The XYZ Foundation provides grants to support the university, aid scientific programs, biotechnology centers. A better way to write that would be the XYZ Foundation provides grants to support universities, aid scientific programs, promote biotechnology centers. So notice in the correct example, each of the bullets starts with a verb. I mean, I'm not saying you need to always start with a verb. I'm just saying make it consistent. You know, if it's a list where you're listing a couple of nouns or things, then be consistent. If you're listing verbs, then be consistent. It's easier for your reader. And so we want to make it reader friendly. So using bullets and vertical lists effectively really helps organize your writing, and it helps your reader get through your points and absorb them. So it's a really good technique to use. Tip number 3, punctuation. Pay attention to punctuation. Look at this sentence. I like cooking, my family, and my pets. Well, if that's a true statement, I feel kind of sorry for your family and your pets, because it means something entirely different if I say I like cooking, comma, my family, comma, and my pets. Notice the difference? Completely different message. So I love that example. And here's another one, similar. Let's eat grandma versus let's eat grandma. You know, that's why I like to tell people punctuation saves lives, because really they're a completely different message. So pay attention to punctuation. These are kind of funny, but truly punctuation makes a big difference. So use commas correctly. Use a comma between coordinate adjectives. So for example, if I'm going to say today is a hot, muggy day, I'm going to say today is a hot, comma, muggy day, which is the same thing as saying today is a hot and muggy day. What you don't want to do is say today is a hot, muggy day with no comma between the adjectives. So those are called coordinate adjectives. So use a comma correctly. The second point, use a comma to separate items in a series. This is a big one, you know. And by the way, I'm a big proponent of something called the Oxford comma. There's still debate among grammarians about whether the Oxford comma should be mandatory. I think it is. The Oxford comma means if I'm writing a series that I have a comma after everything in the series until before and. So I would say, for example, I like the colors red, comma, white, comma, and blue. I like that. Using that comma before the and, I think adds clarity to your writing, and just makes more sense because it's consistent with what we say. If I was saying that sentence, I would say, I like red, white, and blue. So you hear the pause, comma makes sense there. There's still a big debate. Some people don't like that. So, that's something that you can get away either way still. But I'm a proponent of the Oxford comma because I think it makes our writing that much more easily understandable. Then also use a comma in a compound sentence. That is when you add to or you link two sentences or two independent clauses together by the words for, and, but, or yet. So I want to go to the beach, comma, but it's raining. So that would be a good use of the comma. What we want to avoid doing, and this is really one of the other main thing about commas, besides talking about the Oxford comma that I wanted to talk about, is avoid something called a comma splice. That is when you join two complete sentences or independent clauses by a comma. For example, I want to go to the beach. I like swimming. If I wrote that, I like to go to the beach, comma, I like swimming, that's what we call a comma splice. And that's not correct because those are really two separate sentences. I like to go to the beach, period. I like swimming. So avoid comma splices. I see those fairly frequently. And again, a lot of times, impressions are important. And so good punctuation really is important when you're dealing with people inside and outside your organization. That shows you're a good communicator if you pay attention to your commas. Use apostrophes correctly. Use an apostrophe to indicate possession or to form contractions. So to indicate possession, I can say, John's book is on the table. John apostrophe S. That's what I mean by use an apostrophe to indicate possession. That is a perfectly valid use of an apostrophe. That's correct. Use an apostrophe to form contractions. You can say he is on the phone, or you could say he's on the phone, HE apostrophe S. Okay, that's forming a contraction. That is an appropriate use of an apostrophe. But do not use an apostrophe to make nouns plural. This is a mistake that's very, very common. For example, I could say, we've talked today about the 4 C's of business writing. What are the 4 C's of business writing? C, the C's, I'm not using it to indicate possession. It's not a contraction. So it's CS without an apostrophe. I may say, so what I have here is an example that's incorrect. What are the 4 C's of business writing? It's not C apostrophe S, because we're not indicating possession. We're not indicating a contraction. It's simply a plural. So we don't use an apostrophe to make a plural. Good thing to keep in mind. Now, here's some stuff this is some stuff that I really, really like, and I have found useful in my communication, and I think you will too. Now, remember, tip number 4, remember the audience attention curve. And if you look at this graph here, you see typical attention the audience pays to an average presentation over time. So notice in the beginning, you see how high everybody's attention is. And then as the presentation go on, people tend to kind of drift off, start thinking about what you're going to have for dinner tonight. And then the attention curve goes up again at the end. What this tells us is that most people remember what you say in the beginning and what you say at the end. And that's a really important and effective thing for you to remember. And to give you an example, again, this applies to all kinds of business, but let's say, for example, let's say I was going to be arguing a motion in court. And what I want to do is emphasize the strongest points that I have. The weakest, I'm going to acknowledge the weaknesses in my case, but I'm not going to do it first and I'm not going to do it last, because I want the judge to remember the strong parts. So to get that emphasis and to get that to soak in, I'm going to say the strongest thing first, and I'm going to say it again at the end. That's because we know people from scientific research, we know that people remember best what you say first and what you say last. And things tend to get a little bit less clear in the middle. So that's an example. When you want to persuade someone, you want to have your strongest arguments right at the beginning. Remember, we talked about front loading, and we want to repeat them again at the end, because we know that's how the audience attention curve works. Let me think. I think I had another example I was trying to think of. Oh, yes. Audience attention curve is something that is, I think, also very useful when you are delivering bad news. And that's because, the hard part to say is the bad news. And so think of, for example, a rejection letter. Somebody has applied to work at your firm. And you could be delivering this verbally, or you could be say you're sending a letter. Typically, and you've probably seen a lot of rejection letters, the first sentence is, it is not going to be, we've rejected, we've selected somebody else, because, that seems kind of abrupt and harsh, doesn't it? So instead, I would start that letter out with, thank you, show genuine gratitude for applying. And we had so many, we had many applicants. And we've selected an applicant that we think most closely conforms with our needs at this time, but we'll keep your resume on file and we wish you the very best. So see, that's a gentler way of delivering necessary bad news. So remember that. If you want to persuade someone, remember that audience attention curve, because people remember what you say first, what they say, and what you say last. They tend to remember that. And they tend to, it's not that they don't remember, it's just that they gloss over, are more likely to gloss over what you said in the middle. Now, let's say though, how can we, let's say we want to, get around that. How do we get around that audience attention curve? Let's say you've got several different concepts. It's not just one topic in the beginning and the end. You've got several different concepts. Well, here's another curve, and this is from the same professor who came up with the audience attention curve. He said, to keep your audience's attention, structure your message into smaller sections. Because if you structure a presentation into smaller sections, look what happens to the attention curve. Yes, it's high in the beginning. It tends to go down a little bit, but then when you have an intermediate conclusion and start a new section, it goes up again. And then same thing happens, intermediate conclusion, start a new section, the audience attention curve goes back up again. So remember that. What you have is, if you have a longer presentation, you're going to want to break it up into chunks so that you can, and how you do that is again, even look at how you want to have a presentation. If I just said to you today, we're going to talk about business communication, that's true, but it makes it easier to understand if we say, we're going to break it up into this. First, we're going to talk about your initial considerations. Then we're going to talk about strategies, and so forth. That makes it easier for your audience to understand. So, and I have found this in my work to be generally very, very effective. It's certainly very helpful. So it's something I like to keep in mind. So remember that audience attention curve. That's kind of a big deal. And then there's another tip I wanted to mention. And it's something called the repetition effect. And according to the American Psychology Association Dictionary of Psychology, repeated presentation of information or items typically leads to better memory. The repetition effect is a general principle of learning. So you have a graph here that shows on the vertical, it's memory retention, percentage of memory retention, and shows how memory retention drops off over time. But look what happens if you repeat something. So instead of, so today, if somebody said something to me today, I get it, I got it, I understand, I'm going to remember that. Well, maybe 3 days later, it might be a little bit more difficult for me to understand. However, if it was somehow repeated, that would bring my memory back up to where it was before. So that's another really good thing to remember. There is something called the repetition effect. And so you do want to, I'm not saying you over repeat things, but that's kind of built into that structure. And when we talked about cohesion, how every paper or every paragraph should have a head, a body, and an end or tail. And you're going to, and then so each part of your presentation can be structured that way, or each part of your paper will be structured that way. So that repetition effect is very, very helpful when you're trying to persuade your audience. So again, these are all things that each one of these concepts, we cover over the course of a semester, but we're trying to draw them out to give you a general idea here. So conclusion, remember, please, if you take away anything from today, I'm asking you to take away this information. First, business communication should be audience friendly. That's a huge deal. So your first considerations, you've got to know your audience, and you've got to remember, you've got to choose the best method of communication. And then start communicating. It could be writing, it could be verbal, however you're doing it, remember the 4 C's: clarity, continuity, coherence, and concision. I think clarity and concision are the most important. They're all important, but clarity and concision are super, super important. And so we're going to end up a little bit early today. I want to thank you for joining us. For more information about membership in the Private Corporate Counsel program, please visit privatecorporatecounsel.com, or you can call us at 877-647-7887. And then if you have any questions or just want to follow up on this particular presentation, please feel free to contact me. My email address is here. It's mkogut@cplspa.com.